The gunshot echoed across the valley as Willow Valmont ran for her life, the hem of her torn dress catching on sagebrush as she fled from the men who had already taken everything else from her. The year was 1878, and the promise of a new life in Walla Walla, Washington, had turned into a nightmare when bandits ambushed the stagecoach carrying her and the other mail-order brides to their intended husbands. Blood from a graze on her arm soaked through her sleeve as she stumbled down the rocky hillside toward the distant glimmer of water. Behind her, the shouts of the pursuing men grew fainter as darkness fell, but she knew they wouldn't give up easily. Not when they'd killed the driver and guard to get to the women, not when they'd already captured the others. The moon emerged from behind a cloud, illuminating the landscape enough for Willow to see the river ahead. Her parched throat burned with each labored breath as she pushed herself forward, praying the water would provide some sanctuary. Her legs, weak from hours of running, finally gave out as she reached the riverbank. Willow collapsed to her knees beside the rushing water, her hands trembling as she cupped them to drink. The cool liquid was a blessed relief against her cracked lips. A rustling in the bushes behind her made her freeze, the water dripping between her fingers as terror seized her once more. "Over here," a female voice whispered urgently from somewhere to her right. Willow turned to see another woman crouched by the river's edge, her face streaked with dirt and tears. It was Martha, one of the other mail-order brides from the stagecoach. She'd thought Martha had been taken by the bandits, but somehow she'd escaped too. Martha scrambled toward her, falling to her knees beside Willow. "I thought they'd caught you," she whispered, embracing Willow briefly before looking fearfully over her shoulder. "I hid under the stagecoach until they were distracted," Willow explained, keeping her voice low. "What about Sarah and Elizabeth?" Martha's face crumpled. "They took them. I ran when I had the chance, but the snap of a twig silenced them both." Willow grabbed Martha's hand, ready to flee again despite the burning exhaustion in her muscles. But before they could move, a man on horseback emerged from the trees, silhouetted against the night sky. Willow felt Martha's fingers dig painfully into her arm as they both cowered, expecting the worst. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. He approached slowly, hands visible at his sides. "Stand tall, you're safe now," the cowboy said, his voice deep and steady. "Those men won't be following you anymore." The moonlight caught his face as he stepped closer, strong jawline, weather-beaten skin, and eyes that reflected both kindness and something harder, something that suggested this man knew how to handle the dangers of the frontier. "How do we know we can trust you?" Willow demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. The cowboy removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Name's Kieran Blackett. I was tracking those bandits when I heard the shooting. Found your stagecoach about 5 miles back." His expression darkened. "I'm sorry about your companions." Martha began to sob quietly. "There were 2 other women. The bandits took them." Kieran nodded grimly. "I know where they're headed. Their hideout is in the hills about a day's ride from here." He glanced back at his horse. "But first, we need to get you ladies somewhere safe." Willow staggered to her feet, wincing as pain shot through her twisted ankle. "We can't abandon Sarah and Elizabeth to those monsters." "We won't," Kieran promised, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But you're hurt and it's not safe here. There's a homestead about an hour's ride where you can rest. Then I'll go after your friends." "We'll come with you," Willow insisted. Kieran shook his head. "It's too dangerous." "Those are our friends," Willow countered, squaring her shoulders despite the fear still coursing through her. "Besides, I'm a good shot. My father made sure of that." Something like respect flickered in Kieran's eyes. "We'll discuss it at the homestead. Can you ride?" Martha looked terrified at the prospect but nodded bravely. Willow had grown up riding on her family's small farm in Missouri before hardship, and her parents' deaths had forced her to seek a husband through correspondence. "Yes," she answered firmly. Kieran helped Martha onto his horse first, then extended his hand to Willow. When their fingers touched, a jolt of awareness passed through her that had nothing to do with fear. Despite everything, she noticed the gentle strength in his hands as he lifted her up behind Martha. "Hold tight," he instructed, taking the reins and leading the horse through the darkness. "The Simmons family keeps to themselves, but they're good people. They'll help us." As they moved away from the river, Willow looked back once more at the place where she'd almost lost hope. Then she turned her gaze forward, clinging to Martha as they followed the mysterious cowboy who had appeared like an answered prayer in the wilderness. The Simmons homestead was a humble affair, a sturdy log cabin with a small barn and corral nestled in a clearing surrounded by ponderosa pines. A lantern glowed in the window despite the late hour, and a dog's bark announced their arrival. The door swung open before Kieran could knock, revealing a grizzled older man holding a shotgun. His suspicious expression softened when he recognized Kieran Blackett. "What brings you here at this hour?" "Trouble, Simmons. Stagecoach robbery. These ladies need shelter." Mrs. Simmons appeared behind her husband, her gray hair tucked beneath a nightcap. Her eyes widened at the sight of the bedraggled women, and she immediately ushered them inside. Good heavens. Come in, come in. You poor dears look half dead." The warmth of the cabin enveloped Willow as she stepped inside, her legs nearly buckling with relief. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the smell of stew lingered in the air while Mrs. Simmons fussed over them, bringing water and clean cloths for their wounds. Kieran explained the situation to Mr. Simmons in low tones by the door. Willow caught fragments of their conversation, names of the bandits, mentions of previous robberies, and a place called Rattlesnake Canyon. Mrs. Simmons cleaned the graze on Willow's arm with gentle efficiency. "This isn't too deep, thankfully. No need for stitches." "Thank you," Willow murmured, wincing slightly at the sting. "I'm Willow Valmont. This is Martha Reynolds." "Emma Simmons," the older woman replied with a kind smile. "And that's my husband, Joseph. What on earth were two young ladies doing on a stagecoach in this territory? It's not exactly safe for unaccompanied women." Martha looked down at her hands. "We're mail-order brides, or we were supposed to be." Mrs. Simmons's face softened with understanding. "Ah, I see. Headed to Walla Walla," Willow nodded. "I was to marry a farmer named Henry Wilson. Martha was promised to the town blacksmith. And the other two women. Sarah was going to wed the general store owner, and Elizabeth was engaged to a rancher," Martha explained, her voice quavering. "We have to help them, Mrs. Simmons." Kieran approached, his hat in his hands. "I'll set out at first light. The Blackwell gang isn't known for killing women, at least. They'll likely try to sell them to one of the mining camps further north." The thought made Willow's stomach turn. She stood up, ignoring the protest of her sore muscles. "I meant what I said by the river. I'm coming with you." Kieran's jaw tightened. "Miss Valmont, Willow," she corrected him, "and I wasn't asking permission." Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Martha looked between them, then surprisingly spoke up. "I'll come too. I can't just sit here while they're in danger." Mrs. Simmons bustled back into the room with bowls of reheated stew. "No one's going anywhere tonight. You all need rest and food. Joseph can lend you horses in the morning and some proper clothes for the ladies." Kieran finally broke eye contact with Willow, accepting the bowl with a grateful nod to Mrs. Simmons. "You're right. We'll need our strength." They ate in relative silence, the hot food reviving Willow's spirits. After the meal, Mrs. Simmons showed them to a small room with two narrow beds. "You girls get some sleep. I'll have clean clothes for you in the morning." When she'd gone, Martha sat heavily on one of the beds. "Do you really think we can help them?" Willow sank down beside her friend. "We have to try. I couldn't live with myself if we didn't." Martha nodded, then lay down and was asleep within minutes, exhaustion claiming her. Willow remained sitting, her mind too active for rest. After ensuring Martha was deeply asleep, she slipped out of the room. The main room was empty except for Kieran, who sat cleaning a revolver by the dying fire. He looked up when she entered. "You should be resting." Willow sat in the chair opposite him. "Tell me the truth. What are their chances?" Kieran set the gun aside with a sigh. "Better than you might think. Jed Blackwell is cruel, but he's also greedy. Those women are worth more to him alive and unharmed. You know a lot about these bandits." His expression grew distant. "I've been tracking them for 2 years." "Why?" Kieran was silent for so long that Willow thought he wouldn't answer. "Then they killed my brother." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Willow could see the grief etched in the lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without dwelling on it. You should know what you're getting into if you insist on coming tomorrow. These men are dangerous. They won't hesitate to kill you if you give them the chance. I understand the risk. Do you? You were meant to be starting a new life, getting married. Instead, you could die in the wilderness at the hands of outlaws. Willow stared into the embers of the fire. The man I was to marry, I've never even met him. We exchanged letters for 6 months. He seemed kind enough, but she trailed off. But I was marrying him because I had nowhere else to go, not because I loved him. The admission felt strangely liberating. My parents died of fever last winter. The farm went to pay their debts. Becoming a mail-order bride seemed like my only option. Kieran studied her face in the firelight. You're braver than most men I've known, Willow Valmont. The compliment warmed her more than the fire. What will you do after you find the Blackwell gang? A shadow crossed his face. See justice done, and then. He looked surprised by the question, as though he'd never considered what came after his quest for vengeance. I don't know. I've been a drifter most of my life, never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots. Something in his voice made Willow wonder if he longed for those roots, despite his words. Before she could ask more, he stood up. Dawn comes early. You should get some sleep. Recognizing the dismissal, Willow rose as well. Good night, Mr. Blackett. Kieran, he corrected, echoing her earlier insistence. She smiled slightly. Good night, Kieran. As she turned to go, he added, Willow, I'll do everything in my power to save your friends. That's a promise. The conviction in his voice followed her back to the small bedroom, where she finally surrendered to exhaustion beside the softly snoring Martha. Morning arrived with the crowing of roosters and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Willow dressed quickly in the clothes Mrs. Simmons had provided a simple brown skirt, white blouse, and sturdy boots that were only slightly too large. She braided her long chestnut hair and pinned it up under a wide-brimmed hat. In the main room, she found Kieran and Mr. Simmons studying a hand-drawn map spread on the table. Martha was already seated, looking nervous but determined in her borrowed clothes. Mrs. Simmons handed Willow a cup of coffee. Breakfast is ready. You'll need your strength. They ate quickly. The conversation focused on practical matters: the route to Rattlesnake Canyon, water sources along the way, the best approach to the bandits' hideout. Mr. Simmons had packed provisions for them and offered 3 horses his own, one for Martha and a spirited mare for Willow. Daisy has a temper, he warned as he helped adjust the stirrups for her, but she's sure-footed in rough country. Willow stroked the mare's neck. We'll get along just fine. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Simmons pressed a small packet into Willow's hands. Medicinal herbs, just in case. The old woman's kindness brought unexpected tears to Willow's eyes. Thank you for everything. Mrs. Simmons patted her cheek. You come back here when it's over, you hear, both of you girls. With final goodbyes, they set off, Kieran leading the way with a rifle across his saddle and determination in his bearing. The morning sun cast long shadows as they rode east, away from the safety of the Simmons homestead and toward the unknown dangers that lay ahead. They traveled in silence for the first hour, each lost in their own thoughts. Willow found herself studying Kieran's broad shoulders and the confident way he sat his horse. There was something compelling about him beyond his handsome features, a sense of purpose and quiet strength that drew her eye again and again. Eventually, Martha broke the silence. How did you become a tracker, Mr. Blackett? Kieran glanced back at her. Learned from my father. He was a scout for the army during the war. The Civil War? Willow asked. He nodded. He taught me and my brother everything he knew about surviving in the wilderness, said a man who can read the land will never truly be lost. Your brother, Martha said softly. The one who was killed by the Blackwell gang. Kieran's shoulders stiffened slightly. Yes, Thomas, he was a U.S. Marshal, pride mixed with pain in his voice. He was tracking the gang after they robbed a bank in Boise. They ambushed him near the Oregon border. I'm sorry, Martha said. Kieran acknowledged her sympathy with a nod. The territorial governor put a bounty on Jed Blackwell's head after that, $500, dead or alive. Is that why you're after him? The bounty? Willow asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Kieran's expression hardened. I'd hunt him for free. They rode on, the landscape gradually changing from pine forest to more open, rocky terrain. Kieran pointed out landmarks as they traveled: a distinctive mountain peak, an unusual rock formation, a creek that would be their last reliable water source before the canyon. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly. They stopped in the shade of a solitary cottonwood to rest the horses and eat some of the bread and cheese Mrs. Simmons had packed. "How much farther?" Martha asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "We should reach the canyon by nightfall," Kieran replied, scanning the horizon. "But we won't move in until dawn. It's too dangerous in the dark." Willow took a long drink from her canteen. "How many men does Blackwell have with him? Last I heard 6. Maybe 7 now, counting the ones who attacked your stagecoach. And there are 3 of us," Martha said, her voice small. Kieran's expression softened slightly. "Numbers aren't everything, Miss Reynolds. We have surprise on our side and they won't be expecting women. Do you have a plan?" Willow asked, the beginnings of one. Kieran hesitated, then added, "It would help to know what skills you ladies bring to this fight." Martha looked down. "I'm not much good with weapons. My father was a minister, but I'm a trained nurse. I worked in a hospital during the war." Kieran nodded. "That could be useful if things go wrong." He turned to Willow. "You said you can shoot." "My father taught me. We had problems with wolves attacking our livestock." She met his gaze steadily. "I won't freeze if that's what you're worried about." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Good, because once we're in that canyon, there's no turning back." They remounted and continued their journey, the terrain growing increasingly rugged. Willow's muscles ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, but she refused to complain. Every mile brought them closer to Sarah and Elizabeth, and to the confrontation that Kieran had been seeking for 2 years. As the afternoon wore on, Kieran became more vigilant, frequently stopping to study the ground or listen intently. At one point, he dismounted to examine something in the dirt, then remounted with a grim expression. 2 riders passed this way recently, heading toward the canyon. "Bandits?" Martha asked fearfully. "Most likely. We need to be careful from here on." They proceeded more cautiously, staying close to the tree line when possible, avoiding ridgelines where they might be silhouetted against the sky. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Kieran led them to a small, sheltered hollow near a trickle of a stream. "We'll camp here for the night," he announced. "No fire." They ate a cold supper as darkness fell. Kieran spread out his map again, using the last of the twilight to show them the layout of Rattlesnake Canyon. "The hideout is here," he said, pointing to a spot where the canyon widened slightly. "There's a natural cave system with only one main entrance, easy to defend." "So how do we get in?" Willow asked. Kieran's finger moved to another spot on the map. "There's a narrow side passage that leads to the back of the caves. Most people don't know about it. My brother discovered it while tracking them." "Is that how they caught him?" Martha asked softly. Kieran shook his head. "No, they ambushed him before he reached the canyon. He'd sent the information to his superiors before he died. That's how I know about it." Willow studied the map intently, trying to memorize the details. "What exactly is your plan?" "I'll approach from the front at dawn, make enough noise to draw their attention. While they're focused on me, you 2 will use the side passage to get into the caves and find your friends." "That's suicide," Willow protested. "You'll be outnumbered 7 to 1. I don't plan to engage them directly, just keep them distracted long enough for you to get the women out." Martha looked terrified but determined. "And then what?" "Then we run," Kieran said simply. "Get back to the horses and ride hard for the Simmons place." It wasn't much of a plan, Willow thought, but she couldn't think of a better alternative. The lives of their friends hung in the balance, and every hour that passed put them in greater danger. As Martha settled down to sleep, wrapped in a blanket Mr. Simmons had provided, Willow found herself restless. She moved a short distance away, sitting on a boulder that overlooked the valley below, now silvered by moonlight. She sensed rather than heard Kieran approach. He sat beside her, offering his canteen. "You should rest," he said after she'd taken a drink. "So should you," he smiled faintly. "I'm used to going without sleep." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds of the wilderness surrounding them, an owl's distant call, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the soft whisper of wind through pine needles. Why did you really come west? Kieran asked eventually. A woman like you could have found a husband back east. Willow considered the question. After my parents died, the farm was sold to pay their debts. I worked as a seamstress for a while, but the wages were barely enough to survive. When I saw an advertisement for mail-order brides needed in Washington Territory, it seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start. Most women would have been too afraid to travel so far. I've always wanted to see more of the world than just Missouri, she admitted. And I had nothing to keep me there. No family, few friends. What about the man you were to marry? What do you know about him? Henry Wilson, not much. His letters were practical. He described his farm, the house he built, what he expected in a wife. She smiled ruefully. He mentioned that he wanted someone who could cook, clean, and bear children. Romance wasn't high on his list of priorities. Kieran's expression was unreadable in the moonlight. And you were willing to marry a stranger. I was willing to trade my freedom for security, she corrected him. It wasn't about love. Do you believe in love, Willow? The question caught her off guard. I suppose I do. My parents loved each other deeply, even through the hardest times. I've never seen it last, Kieran said quietly. Not in this world. There was such loneliness in his voice that Willow's heart ached for him. Your parents? My mother died when I was young. My father, well, he was more married to the bottle after that. Impulsively, Willow touched his hand. I'm sorry. Kieran looked down at their hands, then back to her face. For a moment, something electric passed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Then he stood abruptly. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow will test us all. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Willow with a strange sense of loss. She remained on the boulder a while longer, watching the stars wheel overhead and wondering what the dawn would bring. When she finally returned to their small camp, she found Martha sleeping fitfully and Kieran sitting with his back against a tree, his hat pulled low over his eyes. But as she settled into her blanket, she noticed his hand resting on his gun, alert even in repose. The thought comforted her as she drifted into an uneasy sleep. Dawn broke with a tentative blush of pink in the eastern sky. They ate quickly and packed their few belongings. The mood was solemn as they prepared for what lay ahead. Kieran handed Willow a revolver. 6 shots, make them count. She checked the chambers and tucked it into the belt of her skirt. Martha watched wide-eyed as Kieran offered her a small knife. Just in case, he said gently. They left the horses concealed in a thicket about a mile from the canyon entrance, secured with enough rope to allow them to graze but not wander. Kieran shouldered his rifle, and they set off on foot, moving as silently as possible through the sparse underbrush. As they neared the canyon, Kieran held up a hand to halt them. He pointed to a narrow trail that wound up the side of the canyon wall. That's your route, he whispered. Follow it to the top, then about 50 yards along the rim you'll find a crevice. It's tight, but you can squeeze through. It leads down into the back of the cave system. Willow nodded, memorizing the directions. Wait for my signal before you move in, Kieran continued. I'll fire 3 shots in quick succession. That's when they'll be focused on the main entrance. How will we find our way out once we're inside? Martha asked nervously. The caves aren't that extensive. Listen for running water. There's a small stream that flows through the main chamber. Follow it toward the entrance. He paused. If something goes wrong, if you hear sustained gunfire, don't wait. Get the women and get out however you can. The unspoken implication hung in the air. If there was sustained gunfire, it meant Kieran was in serious trouble. Willow met his eyes. We'll meet back at the horses. He nodded, then unexpectedly reached out to touch her cheek briefly. Be careful. Before she could respond, he was moving away, circling toward the main entrance of the canyon. Willow watched him go, her heart pounding with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. Come on, she whispered to Martha. We need to get in position. The climb up the side of the canyon was treacherous. Loose rocks threatened to give way beneath their feet, and the trail was barely visible in places. Martha slipped once, nearly falling, but Willow caught her arm just in time. I don't know if I can do this, Martha whispered, her face pale. Think of Sarah and Elizabeth, Willow urged. They need us. They continued upward, finally reaching the rim of the canyon. True to Kieran's directions, they found the crevice about 50 yards along a narrow split in the rock that looked barely wide enough for a child. let alone grown women. "You go first," Willow said, helping Martha position herself at the opening. "I'll be right behind you." Martha took a deep breath and squeezed into the gap. For a terrifying moment, she seemed stuck, but then she wiggled forward and disappeared into the darkness. Willow waited until she heard Martha's whispered, "I'm through," before following. The crevice was even tighter than it had appeared. Willow had to turn sideways, her chest compressed against the cold stone as she inched forward. The rocks scraped her hands and tore at her clothes, but she pressed on, focusing on her breathing to keep panic at bay. After what felt like an eternity, the passage widened slightly, allowing her to move more freely. She could see Martha waiting a few feet ahead, a dim shape in the gloom. They continued downward, the passage gradually expanding until they emerged onto a small ledge overlooking a larger cavern. Voices echoed from below, men's voices, rough with laughter, and the casual cruelty of those accustomed to taking what they wanted. Willow gestured for Martha to stay low as they crept forward to peer over the edge. The scene below made Willow's blood run cold. A campfire burned in the center of the cavern, illuminating perhaps a dozen men sprawled around it, drinking and playing cards. To one side, Sarah and Elizabeth sat huddled together, their hands bound, their dresses torn but still intact. They looked frightened but unharmed. "Where do you think your pretty friends are now?" one of the bandits was saying to the women, his voice slurred with alcohol. "Probably buzzard food by now." Sarah lifted her chin defiantly. "They got away from you, that's what matters," the bandit laughed. "Not for long, Jed's got men looking for them. No one escapes the Blackwell gang." Willow's hand tightened on her revolver. She glanced at Martha, who looked sick with fear but nodded resolutely. Now they just had to wait for Kieran's signal. Minutes crawled by like hours. The bandits continued their drinking and card game, occasionally taunting their captives. Willow studied the layout of the cavern, noting possible escape routes and counting the men, 8 in total, more than Kieran had estimated. Just as her patience was beginning to fray, 3 gunshots rang out in rapid succession, echoing through the cave system. The effect was instantaneous. The bandits leaped to their feet, grabbing weapons. "Someone's at the entrance," one shouted. "It's probably just Jenkins and Hayes returning," another said, but he didn't sound convinced. A man with a bushy beard and an air of authority, Jed Blackwell, Willow guessed, barked orders. "Johnson, Michaels, check it out. The rest of you stay alert." As most of the men's attention turned toward the cave entrance, Willow nodded to Martha. They began making their way down a narrow path that led to the cavern floor, staying in the shadows as much as possible. The sound of more gunfire from the entrance covered their approach. They reached the bottom just as Blackwell sent 2 more men to investigate the disturbance. Now, only 4 remained with the captives. Willow caught Sarah's eye and pressed a finger to her lips in warning. The bound woman's eyes widened in shock, but she gave a tiny nod of understanding. Willow moved closer, Martha following reluctantly behind. When they were within a few yards of the captives, Willow raised her revolver and stepped into the firelight. "Don't move," she ordered, aiming at Blackwell's chest. The remaining bandits froze, momentarily stunned by the appearance of a woman holding them at gunpoint. Blackwell recovered first, his hand dropping toward his holster. "I wouldn't," Willow warned, cocking the hammer. "I'm a very good shot, and you're a very large target." Blackwell sneered but kept his hand away from his gun. "You've got courage, girl, I'll give you that, but you're outnumbered." "Maybe," Willow acknowledged, moving to the side so Martha could reach Sarah and Elizabeth. "But I only need 1 bullet for you, Blackwell. The rest are a bonus." Martha hurriedly untied the captives while Willow kept her aim steady. Elizabeth sobbed with relief when her hands were freed, but Sarah remained focused, immediately searching for a weapon. "Now what?" Blackwell asked, his eyes calculating. "You gonna shoot us all, if necessary," Willow replied, though she knew she couldn't take all 4 men before someone got a shot off. As if reading her thoughts, Blackwell's mouth twisted into an ugly smile. "You don't have the nerve, girl." Before she could respond, a gunshot rang out from the entrance, followed by a cry of pain. Blackwell's head turned reflexively toward the sound, and in that instant, Willow knew they had to move. "Run," she shouted to the others, firing a shot over Blackwell's head to drive him back. The women bolted toward the rear of the cavern, toward the passage Willow and Martha had used to enter. Blackwell and his men reached for their guns, but another series of shots from the entrance forced them to take cover. "This way," Martha called, leading them to the path up to the ledge. Willow brought up the rear, firing once more to discourage pursuit before following the others. They scrambled up the path, adrenaline overcoming exhaustion and fear. Behind them, the sounds of a gun battle echoed through the cavern. "Kieran," Willow murmured worriedly as they reached the ledge and the narrow crevice beyond. "Who?" Sarah asked, breathing hard. "He's helping us," Martha explained as she urged Elizabeth into the crevice first. "He's the reason we found you." Sarah squeezed Willow's arm. "Thank you, both of you." "Save it for when we're safe," Willow replied, glancing anxiously back toward the cavern floor. She could see figures moving in the smoky darkness, but couldn't tell friend from foe. "Go," quickly, one by one, the women squeezed through the crevice, Willow again taking the rear guard position. The passage seemed even tighter on the return journey, or perhaps it was just her awareness of the danger at their backs that made it feel so. When they finally emerged onto the canyon rim, the sun was high, casting harsh light over the rugged landscape. They could hear shouts and occasional gunfire from below. "We need to get to the horses," Willow said, leading them along the rim to where they could descend safely. "Kieran will meet us there." They moved as quickly as they dared over the rocky terrain, helping each other down the steepest parts. Sarah, despite her ordeal, proved remarkably resilient, while Elizabeth seemed to be in shock, moving mechanically where directed. "Who is this Kieran?" Sarah asked as they neared the bottom of the canyon wall. "A bounty hunter," Martha replied. "He saved us after the stagecoach was attacked." "He was tracking the Blackwell gang already," Willow added. "His brother was a marshal they murdered." Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. "So this was personal for him." Willow nodded, her worry for Kieran growing with each passing minute. The gunfire had stopped, which could mean anything. She quickened her pace, urging the others to hurry. They reached the thicket where the horses were hidden without incident. The animals were agitated by the distant sounds of conflict, but still secured where they'd left them. Willow immediately began untying them. "There are only 3 horses," Sarah pointed out. "You and Elizabeth can ride double," Willow decided. "Martha, help them mount up." While Martha assisted the other women, Willow climbed a nearby boulder to scan the area for any sign of Kieran. The canyon entrance was just visible in the distance, but she saw no movement there. "Come on," she whispered. "Where are you?" As if in answer to her silent plea, a figure emerged from the brush at the base of the canyon, a lone rider on a bay horse, moving at a gallop toward their position. "Kieran," she breathed, relief flooding through her, but her relief was short-lived. As the rider drew closer, she saw that it wasn't Kieran at all, but one of the bandits the one Blackwell had called Johnson. He was scanning the ground, following their trail. Willow slid down from the boulder. "Mount up now. We've been followed." The urgency in her voice spurred the others to action. Martha swung into her saddle while Sarah helped Elizabeth onto the second horse before climbing up behind her. Willow untied the third horse, the one meant for Kieran, and handed the reins to Martha. "Lead them toward the Simmons place," she instructed. "Don't stop for anything." Martha's eyes widened. "What about you and Kieran?" "I'll wait for him," Willow said, drawing her revolver. "Now go." Martha hesitated only a moment before nodding. She led the other women away at a swift trot, the horses picking their way through the underbrush toward the open country beyond. Willow positioned herself behind a large boulder, gun ready, watching as the bandit drew nearer. He was moving slowly now, having lost the trail where it crossed a patch of rocky ground. She held her breath as he passed within 20 yards of her hiding place, his attention on the ground. Just when she thought he might continue past without discovering them, his head snapped up. He'd spotted the fresh hoof prints where the women had just departed. With a whoop, he spurred his horse forward. Willow stood, steadied her aim, and fired. The shot went wide, startling the bandit but not hitting him. He wheeled his horse around, drawing his own weapon as he located the source of the gunfire. "Well, look what we have here," he called, grinning as he spotted her. One little bird stayed behind. Willow ducked back behind the boulder as he fired, the bullet chipping stone inches from her head. She counted to 3, then risked a glance around the edge of her cover. The bandit was circling, trying to get a clear shot. "Your friends are dead, girl," he taunted. "Blackwell's gutting that bounty hunter right about now." Fear clutched at Willow's heart, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't afford distraction. She fired again, this time grazing the bandit's arm. He cursed, dropping his gun. Before he could recover, another shot rang out from the direction of the canyon. The bandit jerked in his saddle, a look of surprise crossing his face before he toppled to the ground, dead. Willow spun toward the sound of the shot, her gun raised. A rider was approaching at a gallop, and this time there was no mistaking the broad shoulders and the distinctive way he sat his horse. "Kieran," she cried, lowering her weapon. He reined in beside her, blood streaking one side of his face from a wound at his temple. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine, the others. I sent them ahead." She climbed up on a rock to better see his face. "You're bleeding." He touched the wound dismissively. "Just a graze, where's my horse?" With Martha, I told her to lead the others to safety. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Smart thinking. He extended his hand. "Come on, we need to move. Blackwell and at least 2 others are still alive and likely on our trail." Willow took his hand, letting him pull her up behind him on the horse. As her arms went around his waist, she felt him wince. "You're wounded elsewhere," she accused. "It can wait," he replied tersely, urging the horse into motion. "Hold tight." They galloped away from the canyon, following the trail the other women had taken. Willow clung to Kieran, acutely aware of the warmth of his body against hers, the solid strength of him despite his injuries. She could feel something wet soaking through his shirt where her hand rested blood. She realized with a surge of fear. "How bad is it?" she asked, her mouth close to his ear to be heard over the pounding hooves. "Bad enough," he admitted. "Knife caught me between the ribs." "But Blackwell's worse off. I put a bullet in his leg before I got out." They rode hard for nearly an hour, the horse laboring beneath their combined weight. Finally, Kieran slowed to a walk, allowing the animal to recover. "We should catch up to the others soon," he said, his voice strained. They were moving slower with 2 on each horse. Willow peered over his shoulder. "There's a stream ahead. We should stop, let the horse drink, and I need to look at your wounds." Kieran didn't argue, which told her more about his condition than his words had. He guided the horse to the stream and dismounted with a grunt of pain, nearly falling as his boots hit the ground. Willow slid down quickly and steadied him. "Sit," she ordered, guiding him to a fallen log. "Let me see." Kieran sank onto the log, his face pale beneath the dirt and blood. Willow helped him remove his vest and shirt, revealing a deep stab wound in his left side. Blood oozed steadily from it. "It needs stitches," she said, remembering the packet Mrs. Simmons had given her. She retrieved it from her pocket and found not only the herbs but also a small needle and thread. "Lie back." Kieran complied without protest, stretching out on the soft grass beside the stream. Willow cleaned the wound as best she could with water from the stream, then crushed some of the herbs and applied them to stop the bleeding. She threaded the needle with hands that trembled only slightly. "This will hurt," she warned. Kieran's mouth quirked in a ghost of a smile. "Not my first time being stitched up." Willow took a deep breath and began sewing the wound closed. Kieran remained silent throughout, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the sky above. When she finished, she wrapped a strip torn from her petticoat around his torso to hold the dressing in place. The wound on his temple was less serious. A bullet had grazed him, leaving a furrow that had bled profusely but wasn't deep. She cleaned it and applied more of the herbs. "There," she said when she'd finished. "Not as neat as Martha would have done, but it should hold." Kieran caught her hand as she withdrew it from his face. "Thank you." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a current of understanding and connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. For a moment, Willow thought he might pull her closer, but a sound in the distance broke the spell. Hoofbeats approaching. They both tensed, but it was Martha who appeared around the bend in the stream, leading the other horses. Relief washed over her face when she saw them. "Thank God." "We doubled back when we realized you weren't following." She dismounted quickly, hurrying to examine Kieran's injuries with professional efficiency. "You've lost a lot of blood." "I've had worse," Kieran insisted, though he accepted her help in rebandaging the wound. Sarah and Elizabeth rode up as Martha was finishing. They both looked exhausted but resolute. "We should keep moving," Sarah said. "Those men could still be following us." Kieran nodded, struggling to his feet with Willow's assistance. "She's right, we're still too close to the canyon." They remounted, Kieran now on his own horse though Willow rode close beside him, watching for signs that he might fall. They traveled steadily through the afternoon, pushing the horses as much as they dared. The landscape gradually changed from rocky terrain to more wooded areas, signaling their approach to the Simmons homestead. As twilight descended, the familiar silhouette of the cabin appeared ahead. Smoke rose from the chimney, and lanterns glowed in the windows, a beacon of safety in the gathering darkness. Mr. Simmons met them in the yard, shotgun in hand, until he recognized them. "Thank the Lord," he exclaimed, helping Elizabeth down from her horse. "Emma, they're back, Mrs." Simmons burst from the house, her face alight with relief. She embraced each of the women in turn, then gasped when she saw Kieran's blood-stained clothes. "Inside, all of you," she ordered. "Joseph, fetch hot water and my medicine box." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Martha and Mrs. Simmons tended to Kieran's wounds while Willow helped Sarah and Elizabeth bathe and change into clean clothes. Mr. Simmons stood guard outside, alert for any sign of pursuit. A hot meal was prepared, beds were arranged, and finally, exhaustion claimed them all. Willow woke in the night, restless despite her fatigue. She slipped from the bed she shared with Martha, careful not to disturb the other woman, and made her way to the main room. A small fire still burned in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Kieran sat beside it, bare-chested except for the bandages, staring into the flames. He looked up as she entered, surprise and something warmer crossing his face. "You should be resting," he said softly. Willow sat in the chair opposite him. "So should you." He shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Couldn't sleep, too many thoughts. About Blackwell, partly." He poked at the fire with a stick. "He's still out there, wounded but alive. You'll find him again," Willow said with certainty. Kieran studied her face. "Maybe, but not right away. First, I need to see you ladies safely to Walla Walla." The mention of their destination sent an unexpected pang through Willow. In the intensity of the past days, she'd almost forgotten the purpose of their journey to meet and marry men they'd never seen. "What will you do after that?" she asked. "Continue hunting, I suppose." He sounded less certain than before. "It's all I've known for the past 2 years, and when you finally catch him." "What then?" Kieran was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I never thought beyond that moment." Willow leaned forward. "Maybe it's time you did." Their eyes met across the fire, and again Willow felt that connection, that pull toward him that defied rational explanation. They barely knew each other, yet she felt she understood him in ways that mattered. "You could start over," she suggested softly. "Find a place to put down those roots you talked about." "Alone." The word held a wealth of loneliness. Willow's heart raced as she gathered her courage. "Not necessarily alone." Kieran's expression changed, hope warring with caution. "Willow, I have nothing to offer a woman like you." "No home, no steady income. I wasn't asking for those things," she interrupted. "I was offering friendship. The rest, well, that would be up to you." A log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. In the renewed light, Willow saw the conflict in Kieran's eyes: desire and fear, hope and doubt. "What about your intended husband in Walla Walla?" he asked. "A man I've never met who wants a housekeeper more than a wife." She shook her head. "I was willing to marry him because I had no better choices. But now I'm wondering if there might be another path." She held his gaze steadily. "For both of us." Kieran reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. "It won't be easy. The life I lead, I'm not asking for easy," Willow said. "I'm asking for real." He studied their joined hands, then looked up at her with such intensity that her breath caught. "You deserve better than a broken man with a dangerous past." "Let me decide what I deserve." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, you don't seem broken to me. Wounded, yes, but healing." A smile slowly spread across his face, the first real smile she'd seen from him, transforming his features from handsome to breathtaking. "You're a remarkable woman, Willow Valmont." "So I've been told," she replied with a small smile of her own. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands still joined across the space between them, each lost in thought. The fire burned low, casting the room in soft shadows. "We should get some rest," Kieran said eventually, though he made no move to release her hand. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges," Willow nodded, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. "Good night, Kieran." As she rose to return to her bed, he caught her wrist gently. "Willow," she turned back to him, questioning, "thank you for reminding me there's more to life than vengeance." The simple sincerity in his words touched her deeply. There is much more. Morning brought clear skies and the decision to continue to Walla Walla. The Simmons insisted on providing a wagon for the journey, arguing that Elizabeth was still too weak for extended horseback riding, and Kieran's wound needed time to heal properly. "It's only a day and a half to Walla Walla with the wagon," Mr. Simmons said as he hitched up the team. "You can return it when you're settled." The women helped pack provisions while Kieran conferred with Mr. Simmons about the safest route. By mid-morning, they were ready to depart. Mrs. Simmons hugged each of them in turn. "You're welcome here anytime," she told Willow as they embraced. "All of you? Thank you for everything," Willow replied, truly grateful for the older woman's kindness. With final goodbyes, they set off, Kieran driving the wagon with Willow beside him on the seat. Martha, Sarah, and Elizabeth rode in the back, cushioned by blankets against the jolting of the rough road. As they traveled, the women talked quietly among themselves. Willow learned that Sarah had reconsidered her plan to marry the general store owner. "After what happened, I'm not sure I want to stay in this territory at all," she confided. "I have a sister in Oregon. Perhaps I'll go to her instead." Elizabeth, still shaken by their ordeal, nodded agreement. "I keep thinking about how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't escaped, Willow, if Mr. Blackett hadn't found you." "Kieran," he corrected from the driver's seat. "Just Kieran is fine." Elizabeth smiled weakly. "Kieran, then, we owe you our lives." He shook his head. "You owe Willow and Martha. They're the ones who insisted on coming after you when most would have counted you lost." "What about you, Martha?" Sarah asked. "Will you still marry the blacksmith?" Martha looked uncertain. "I don't know. I never really wanted to be a wife. I was a nurse during the war. I was good at it. I only agreed to come west because my father insisted a woman needs a husband." She glanced at Willow. "But after seeing how you handled yourself these past days, maybe there are other paths for women like us." Willow smiled encouragingly. "Perhaps Walla Walla needs a nurse more than the blacksmith needs a wife." The conversation drifted to other topics as they traveled through the day. Kieran remained mostly silent, focused on driving the wagon, but occasionally his eyes would meet Willow's, and that unspoken connection would flare between them. They camped that night beside a small lake, the water reflecting the stars overhead. After a simple meal, the women retired to the wagon to sleep while Kieran spread his bedroll near the fire. Willow joined him there, bringing a cup of coffee. "How's your side?" "Healing," he said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Your stitching is holding well." She sat beside him, drawing her knees up to her chest. "What will happen when we reach Walla Walla tomorrow? You'll meet your intended husband," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "The others will decide their own paths. And you," he stared into the fire. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about finding another path." Hope flickered in Willow's chest. And I wonder if perhaps Walla Walla might need a deputy sheriff." He glanced at her. "I hear it's a growing town. Might be enough work for a man with my skills, but without the constant moving." Willow couldn't hide her smile. "That sounds like a fine idea. It would mean staying in one place," he continued. "Having a home of sorts, putting down those roots we talked about." "Roots can be a good thing," she said softly. "They keep you grounded when the storms come." Kieran set his coffee aside and turned to face her fully. "Willow, I know we've only known each other a few days," but she placed her fingers gently on his lips, stopping his words. "Time isn't always the best measure of knowing someone. Sometimes you learn more about a person in a crisis than in years of peaceful acquaintance." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth spiraling through her. "And what have you learned about me?" "That you're brave but not fearless. That you value justice but also mercy. That beneath your hard exterior is a man who would risk his life for strangers because it was the right thing to do." She met his gaze steadily. That you're the kind of man I could build a life with if you wanted that too. Kieran's eyes darkened with emotion. I do want that, more than I've wanted anything in a very long time. He hesitated. But what about your intended? He's expecting you. He's expecting a mail-order bride. Any woman would do, she smiled slightly. I'll write to him when we reach town, explain that circumstances have changed, and if he objects, then he objects. But I won't marry a man I don't love when. She took a deep breath. When I've met someone I could love. The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful. Kieran reached out slowly, cupping her face in his hand, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. Willow Valmont, he said softly, you've given me back a future I thought was lost. Whatever comes next, I want to face it with you beside me. He leaned forward, and she met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His arms encircled her, careful of his injured side, drawing her closer. Willow surrendered to the sweetness of the moment, to the rightness of being in his embrace. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. I never believed in fate until I found you kneeling by that river. Willow laughed softly. Is that what it was? Fate, what else would you call it? Of all the places in this vast territory, I found you exactly when you needed finding. She considered this, remembering the desperation of that moment, the overwhelming relief when he appeared. Perhaps it was fate or providence. Either way, I'm grateful. They stayed by the fire a while longer, talking softly of the future possibilities, hopes, dreams long deferred now cautiously revisited. When Willow finally retired to the wagon, her heart was lighter than it had been in years. They reached Walla Walla the following afternoon, the town spreading before them in a jumble of wooden buildings and dusty streets. It was larger than Willow had expected, with a proper main street lined with businesses, a church spire rising above the rooftops, and the bustle of a community in the midst of growth. As they drove down the main street, people stopped to stare at the battered wagon and its unusual occupants. News traveled fast in frontier towns, and it seemed word of the stagecoach robbery had preceded them. The sheriff's office is there, Kieran said, pointing to a building with a wooden star hanging beside the door. We should report what happened. They pulled up in front of the office, and a middle-aged man with a silver star pinned to his vest emerged, eyeing them curiously. Sheriff Morgan, Kieran greeted him, climbing down stiffly from the wagon. The sheriff squinted at him. Do I know you, Kieran Blackett? My brother was Thomas Blackett, U.S. Marshal. Recognition dawned on the sheriff's face. Tom's brother, I heard about what happened to him. Terrible business. He glanced at the women in the wagon. And who might these ladies be? Introductions were made, and the sheriff's expression grew grave as they explained what had happened to the stagecoach and its passengers. The Blackwell gang, he muttered. Been causing trouble all over the territory. You say you wounded Jed himself? Kieran nodded. Bullet to the leg. He won't be moving fast for a while. That's something, at least. The sheriff turned to the women. You ladies were mighty fortunate Mr. Blackett found you. As for your intended husbands, they've been raising hell about your disappearance. Wanted to organize a search party, but I told them to wait for word from the territorial authorities. Willow exchanged glances with the others. We should let them know we've arrived safely. They'll be at the hotel, Sheriff Morgan said. That's where most newcomers stay until they get settled. With directions to the hotel, they thanked the sheriff and continued down the street. Kieran's hand found Willow's briefly as he helped her down from the wagon. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. She squeezed his hand. Completely sure. The hotel was a 2-story clapboard building with a wide porch and a small dining room visible through the front windows. As they entered, a heavyset man with a florid face approached immediately. My God, it's really you, he exclaimed, staring at Elizabeth. We thought you were dead. 2 other men appeared behind him, their expressions a mix of relief and shock as they recognized Sarah and Martha. Willow glanced around, wondering which of the men might be Henry Wilson, her intended. A tall, thin man with a severe expression stepped forward, his eyes settling on Willow. Miss Valmont, I presume, she nodded. Mr. Wilson, indeed. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her dirty, torn clothing and disheveled hair. I see the journey was not kind to you. There was an incident with bandits, she explained, disliking his clinical assessment. We were fortunate to escape with our lives. Wilson's eyes shifted to Kieran, who stood protectively close to Willow. And who might this be? Kieran Blackett, Kieran answered, extending his hand. I helped the ladies reach Walla Walla safely. Wilson ignored the offered hand. I see. Well, Miss Valmont, now that you've arrived, we should discuss the arrangements for our wedding. I've reserved the church for Sunday, assuming you required time to recover from your journey. His cold efficiency confirmed everything Willow had feared about their potential match. There was no warmth in his manner, no genuine concern for what she'd endured, only impatience to complete their transaction. Mr. Wilson, she began carefully, I'm afraid there has been a change in circumstances. I will not be able to honor our arrangement. Wilson's face flushed with anger. What? After I paid for your passage, after I waited all this time? I will repay your expenses, Willow said firmly, but I cannot marry a man I do not love. Love, Wilson scoffed. What has love to do with it? Our agreement was a practical one. I need a wife to manage my household, and you need a husband for security and respectability. Perhaps those terms were acceptable to me before, but they are not now. She stood taller, drawing strength from Kieran's presence beside her. I have discovered there are other paths available to me. Wilson's gaze darted between her and Kieran, comprehension dawning. I see, you found a more appealing prospect. His lip curled. Very well, I want nothing to do with damaged goods in any case. Kieran stepped forward, his expression dangerous. Mind your tongue, sir, when speaking of Miss Valmont. A tense silence followed, broken by the sound of Martha clearing her throat. Mr. Roberts, she said to the blacksmith who had been her intended, I must also withdraw from our arrangement. My skills as a nurse are needed here, and I have decided to pursue that calling rather than marriage at this time. The blacksmith looked disappointed but nodded respectfully. I understand, Miss Reynolds. Your courage in rescuing your friends speaks highly of your character. I wish you well. Sarah and Elizabeth had similar conversations with their intendeds, though with varying degrees of acceptance. When all was settled, the women retreated to rooms the hotel provided for the night, while Kieran went to speak with the sheriff again about a possible position in Walla Walla. Later that evening, Willow sat on the small balcony outside her hotel room, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. A knock at her door roused her from her contemplation. Kieran stood in the hallway, freshly bathed and in clean clothes, looking more handsome than ever despite the bandage still visible at his temple. May I join you? He asked. Willow smiled, stepping aside to let him in. How did your meeting with the sheriff go? Better than expected. Kieran followed her onto the balcony. Turns out he's been looking for a deputy for months. With my experience tracking outlaws and my brother's reputation, he offered me the position on the spot. That's wonderful, Willow exclaimed, genuinely pleased. So you'll be staying in Walla Walla? It seems I will. He leaned against the railing, watching her face. What about you? What will you do now? Willow looked out over the town, considering. I have some money saved, not much, but enough to get started. Perhaps I could open a small dressmaking shop. I've always had a talent for it. I have no doubt you'd succeed at whatever you put your mind to, Kieran said with a smile, then his expression grew more serious. Willow, there's something I need to say. She turned to face him fully, heart quickening at his tone. Yes. When I found you and Martha by that river, I was a man with only one purpose: vengeance. I didn't think beyond the next day, the next step in tracking Blackwell. He took her hands in his. But these past days with you have shown me there can be more to life than revenge. That perhaps there's a future worth building, worth fighting for. I believe that too, Willow said softly. Kieran's grip tightened slightly. I know it's sudden. I know we've known each other only a short time, but I've never been more certain of anything than I am of my feelings for you. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, simple silver band. This was my mother's. I've carried it with me all these years, never thinking I'd have cause to use it. His eyes met hers, vulnerable yet determined. Willow Valmont, will you marry me? Not as a matter of convenience or security, but because I believe we could build something real together. Something true. Tears pricked at Willow's eyes as she looked at the ring. then at the man holding it, this complex, honorable man who had saved her life and in doing so, had somehow saved his own as well. "Yes," she whispered, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Kieran Blackett." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms, his kiss sealing their promise to one another. As the last light of day faded from the sky, Willow knew with absolute certainty that the path she had chosen, the one that had seemed most dangerous and uncertain, was in fact the only one that could have led her home. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church on the edge of town, with Martha, Sarah, and Elizabeth as witnesses. Sheriff Morgan stood beside Kieran as best man, his gruff exterior softened by the occasion. Mrs. Simmons had traveled from her homestead with her husband to attend, bringing a quilt she'd made as a wedding gift. Sarah had decided to stay in Walla Walla after all, having found work as a teacher in the town's small school. Elizabeth was preparing to travel to Oregon to start anew, while Martha had already begun establishing herself as the town's nurse, setting up a small practice with the doctor's blessing. As Willow stood beside Kieran, exchanging vows beneath the simple wooden cross, she marveled at how drastically her life had changed in such a short time. The mail-order bride who had traveled west seeking security had found something far more precious: love, purpose, and a true partner with whom to face whatever challenges lay ahead. After the ceremony, they moved into a small house near the sheriff's office, nothing grand, but solid and well-built, with room for growth. Kieran took to his duties as deputy with the same dedication he'd shown in tracking outlaws, but now he returned home each night to Willow, his restless spirit finding peace in her presence. Willow opened her dressmaking shop in a vacant storefront on Main Street, her skill and creativity quickly earning her a reputation that brought customers from miles around. Between her business and Kieran's position, they built a comfortable life together, saving for the future while enjoying the present. The Blackwell gang was finally captured 6 months after their wedding, though Jed Blackwell himself eluded justice a while longer. When word came that he'd been spotted near the Idaho border, Kieran struggled with the pull of his old vendetta. "I should go after him," he told Willow one night as they sat on the porch of their home. "Finish what I started." Willow took his hand, her touch gentle but her gaze resolute. "You're not that man anymore, Kieran. Let the marshals handle it. Your place is here now." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right. Thomas would understand. He always said vengeance was a poor substitute for justice." 3 weeks later, news arrived that Jed Blackwell had been killed in a shootout with U.S. Marshals. Kieran received the news with quiet reflection rather than triumph, a sign of how far he'd come from the vengeance-driven man who'd found Willow by the river. As the seasons changed and their first anniversary approached, Willow shared news of her own. She was expecting their first child. Kieran's face, when she told him, transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. "A family," he said wonderingly, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Our family." 8 months later, their son was born, Thomas Joseph Blackett, named for Kieran's brother and Mr. Simmons, who had shown them such kindness in their time of need. The baby had Kieran's dark hair and Willow's green eyes, a perfect blend of them both. Life in Walla Walla settled into a rhythm of growth and prosperity. The town expanded as more settlers arrived, and with them came new opportunities. Kieran eventually became sheriff when Morgan retired, while Willow's dressmaking business flourished enough to hire 2 assistants. Their family grew as well. A daughter, Emma Rose, joined them 2 years after Thomas, followed by another son, William, 2 years later. Their house expanded with their family, Kieran adding rooms with his own hands, building the home they'd both dreamed of. On the 5th anniversary of their meeting, Kieran surprised Willow with a trip back to the river where he'd found her now part of a peaceful homestead they'd purchased as an investment. They stood together on the bank, the water flowing gently past, their children playing nearby under Martha's watchful eye. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if we'd never met?" Willow asked, leaning against her husband's chest as his arms encircled her. Kieran pressed a kiss to her temple. I try not to dwell on might have beens, but I know I was a half man before I found you, living only for revenge. You gave me back my future." Willow turned in his embrace, meeting his eyes still as intense as the day they'd met, but now filled with a contentment that hadn't existed then. "And you gave me the courage to choose my own path, even when it seemed the most uncertain one. Would you choose it again?" He asked, a hint of his old vulnerability showing through, knowing everything that's happened. "1,000 times over," she replied without hesitation. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, I wouldn't change any of it." He smiled, the expression transforming his face just as it had the first time she'd seen it by the fireside. "I love you, Willow Blackett, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "And I love you," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as the setting sun bathed them in golden light. Behind them, their children's laughter rang out, a joyful counterpoint to the gentle murmur of the river that had witnessed the beginning of their journey. From desperation to hope, from strangers to family, the path had not always been easy, but it had led them exactly where they were meant to be together. Home. Safe.